Do you want to share what is on your mind, what brought you here tonight?
So I'm doing the 1 month. I'm following the 1 month schedule, and it's been 4 days. I've been sticking to the schedule pretty much like to the T. So first week is basically all logic games, and I feel like I was okay with logic games, but this kind of taught me a lot of the technical stuff. Like I didn't know how to categorize questions. I kind of just went by intuition because I did a lot of questions. So that was really good. But I also found like one of the major problems was that I didn't know when, after sorting out all the rules, I didn't know, I guess, when to stop deducting inferences and when to, well, I didn't, sometimes like if the question seems a bit ambiguous, I will just jot down the rules, do the contrapositive and all that sort of stuff, but I wouldn't then make the link to do the diagrams. Maybe it's because I haven't like read the rules very thoroughly, but I feel like sometimes, yeah, that's a really hard bit for me.
Yeah, it's a big dilemma knowing when you've made all the inferences you can versus when to go on to the questions. And this is really just a matter of experience and exposure to get a certain internal sense of it. That being said, there are some common formats games have that will naturally lead to certain kinds of inferences. And my favorite example of that is in situations where you see lots of conditional statements and the same variables featured in multiple rules. When you have a grouping in-out game with lots of conditional statements, it is often the case that you can link those together to form a long conditional chain. And that would be your upfront work, giving you the inferences that you need to draw, to basically solve the game more efficiently going forward as you get into the questions. For other games that are more ordering based or matching based, if you have blocks of variables, those blocks can be particularly impactful. And by a block, I mean two variables that must always be together or must always be adjacent to one another or consecutive. There are relatively fewer places that a block can go. So for example, if there were a game with 5 slots and you had two variables that had to be adjacent in a particular order, those variables could be on slots 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 3 and 4, and 4 and 5. So that's only 4 different possibilities. And if we also learned that the block was, let's say, variables A and B that must go consecutively in that order, but we also learned that A could never be in slot 1, that would mean that out of those 4 possibilities, we were now reduced to only 3 possibilities, slots 2 and 3, 3 and 4, and 4 and 5. Now, 3 possibilities, that's pretty manageable. You could then draw out those 3 different main diagrams to guide you over the course of the game. So that's the way I think about things, is what variables are especially limiting or limited depending upon how you frame it. And that could dictate what your main diagrams end up looking like. If you see the same variable featured in multiple rules, that's a suggestion that that variable could potentially help you to make some kind of inference.
Yeah.
And this is something, like I said, once again, it comes through experience, through doing lots and lots of games. And games really is the most perfectible section on this exam. And if you did every game ever released, or even just the most recent half of games, and you did them multiple times, you would really start to see those patterns, and then they really couldn't throw anything totally new at you on test day.
Okay. And because this week I've been just focusing on logic games, I've been quite worried about my logical reasoning and reading comprehension, just because logic games is my strongest area and my best scoring area most of the time. So I was wondering, should I do some logical reasoning or reading comprehension on the side in addition to the schedule, or do you think it's unnecessary?
Yeah, I would do it on this side. I wouldn't ever focus solely on one section at the exclusion of the others. So if you've already done a bit of studying on all 3, I wouldn't want you to get rusty on reasoning or reading comp. I would still cycle that in a little bit. So maybe I would do 60, if you want to focus on games, do 60% games, 20 on logical reasoning, and 20 on reading comprehension.
Mm. And at this point in time, do you recommend doing it under time conditions? Because for me, I've been practicing the LSAT for a while. But this week I haven't been doing the logic games with under time conditions, just sticking to the schedule itself. So I was wondering if you think it'll be more helpful for me to just do everything under time conditions, or because my LSAT, it is in a month.
It's in a month. It's in January.
Yeah, I'm taking my first one in January. I think I'll probably take the March one as well after that.
Okay. Well, if you're thinking about January, I would do it timed. I would absolutely do timed practice at this point. Your test is about a month away, right? A little bit less maybe. So yeah, I would definitely do timed work and focus on the pacing and the endurance, because it's coming around the bend. I would do at least one timed exam per week between now and then, and along with detailed review of that exam. And then if you want to do some logic games drilling on the side, you could certainly do that.
Okay. I was thinking maybe I should skip to do the LR and RC first before the logic games, because I always lose about like 7 or 8 marks on the RC, and on average around 4 to 5 on the logical reasoning. So not quite sure if I'm not quite sure what to do right now because it's been a month.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to work on everything. I think one thing that helps to solve that issue is simply doing a timed exam a week along with detailed review of that exam, because then you're getting plenty of practice on all sections and having the opportunity to review all of them as well. And if you notice certain weak areas or areas you want to focus on, like let's say you had trouble with flaw questions in logical reasoning or resolve the paradox questions, you could drill those by type, meaning you do a couple dozen of those in a row to help you better spot those patterns. And then you're doing the odd logic game section here or there on the side, fitting it in where you can, when you don't have the time to do a full-length 5-section timed exam.
Yeah. And I've just got a question about the writing. It's not scored, but do we need to like practice at all? Because I haven't done anything at all on it.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about the writing for now, just because, like you said, it is not scored, but it is worth maybe looking at 1 or 2 of them just to get a sense of what it's like. And you could write a draft of one just to see how it goes for you. But I wouldn't imagine you'll have too much trouble with it. And you really can't go wrong with it. The idea is there's a choice between 2 different options. Both options are equally weighted. So you pick one side, argue in favor of that, while still acknowledging the weaknesses of your side and the benefits of the other, but you do still firmly come down on your side. So you're making a strong but reasonable argument in favor of your side. So you're acknowledging the shades of gray and the fact that, of course, they are equally weighted, but you're saying that the principles that support choosing your side are more important than those that would support the other side.
Okay. Cool. Because with my, I think I need more help on my RC. For me, the first thing is the speed. Maybe I think I'm not jotting down the right notes, so I'm jotting down too much detail because I get stressed if I don't jot down enough. I feel like I don't know anything. And I guess I don't trust myself to mentally know where everything is. But also reading, or I guess working through the questions, I keep going back to the passage to find the relevant section, which I think is what you're supposed to do, but I feel like I take way too long rereading the same things, or like, especially with complicated passages or like scientific ones, especially if the topic isn't something I know of, then yeah, I tend to do really badly on those.
Yeah, certainly for the details, you typically will have to go back. and that's totally fine. You really just want to walk away from your initial read of the passage with the main idea, the author's opinion, the major viewpoints presented. But the details, you can simply go back and find those when you need them in the moment. And it's also natural for unfamiliar topics to be a bit more difficult. That's natural. And they do that on purpose. They purposely choose topics that, as few test takers as possible, will have prior familiarity with. And there's nothing to do but make the best of it. And remember that they're not really testing you for content. They're testing you for the structure of the passages, how the author goes about making their argument, and the various viewpoints presented within
it. Okay. And yeah, so because now the LSAT's moved to digital, we can't just jot down, I guess, points next to it. Because I didn't go to the LSAT digital session, but do we like get our own like scrap paper where we write notes, or how does it work?
Yeah, they give you a booklet of 12 to 14 pages, and that booklet is where you can write all your scratch paper. You can use that for all your notes, for all sections of the exam, games, reasoning, and reading comprehension.
Yeah, because I found that that's what I've been doing when I was doing the prac exams. But I found that as I was writing the notes on my scrap paper, it doesn't, well, I guess it made it even harder to find the relevant section. Because again, like I'm not writing that much, so I don't know which corresponds to which, or which notes corresponds to whichever section in the text. Yeah, that's why I feel like I need to write down a lot of details so I can keep track of everything. But yeah, at the same time, it's taking a long time.
Yeah, that's certainly not ideal. You might consider simply writing down author's opinion and the major viewpoints, just a couple of words about each one. And you could even, if you want to, there are highlighting and underlining tools on the digital LSAT. So you might consider using those to note other things. You could, for example, highlight one color for where the evidence appears and highlight another color for where the author's opinion appears. That's one approach you could take if you wanted to really make notes on the passage. I'm not saying I would recommend it, but different things work for different people. So it might benefit you to do a little bit of experimentation to see what you like best. For me personally, I would just note on my scratch paper the main idea, the author's opinion, and then go back for any details that I need. And that requires a bit of skimming, of course, but with practice, you can get pretty fast at that skimming.
Okay, and then do you just make like a mental note of where all the details are?
Yeah, so I would think to myself, the author's opinion was presented and summarized at the very end of paragraph 1, and then the second half of paragraph number 2 is where there are a lot of details and lists of things. So I'll go there for any detail-oriented questions.
Okay. And with the true passages, like passage A and passage B, I find that a lot of times, especially when they're legal passages, they tend to, they focus on the same topic, but it's not necessarily the same scope. And a lot of the times, I find the harder ones are the ones that actually have things that they agree upon, but then they differ on other little details. And it's really hard because I'm trying to basically process 2 passages at once.
They certainly are harder. And there's no easy answer to that other than practice and to recognize that they may not be directly at odds overall on everything, but they may instead be at odds on one particular nuanced point. And they may not even be immediately apparent upon your initial read. But of course, when there's a question about that, you've got to go back and do a little bit of hunting. And that might involve some process of elimination as well.
So do you recommend leaving those to last?
Honestly, I like doing them last just because they are a little bit different in nature. So I would either say do them last if they don't come as naturally to you. Otherwise, I would just do things in the order given.
Yeah, because I feel like when at the start of the RC, I always take time to organize or order the passages, from easiest to hardest. But I find that like sometimes an article that I think is easy is actually really hard. And I'm doing like one of the hardest passages at the start. And I find that when that happens, my score actually drops a lot because it just takes up so much time. And I panic in the first passage as well. So I just like kind of unsure as to how to identify the order, I guess.
I would just do things in the order given typically. Takes time to jump around, and it's actually a little bit harder to jump around on the digital LSAT than on the paper one because you can't flip pages quite as easily. You're clicking one question at a time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the simplest thing is to just do things in the order given. But if you encounter something that's just too difficult to deal with in the moment, just skip it and come back to it later.
Yeah. I think that's it from me in terms of questions. I haven't worked too much on LR and RC. I feel like I have more questions next week or in the next couple of weeks as I work on those two sections. Yeah.
Of course. Well, please keep in touch as they come up. I'm happy to help. Before we sign off, what would you say is the biggest insight you got from our call today?
I think the biggest insight was actually the help with the RC, because I always was so obsessed on like choosing the order because I felt like that really made a difference. But yeah, I would try like doing it in order and actually just doing things more in time conditions because I thought like I should stick to the schedule to the T, but I felt like when the LSAT's in like 1 month, I should still do the time conditions on the side, as well as the writing because I didn't know anything about the writing section at all. So yeah, it was good to, and I like there was no material on it or whatnot, not that I was aware of. So I think yeah, that was really helpful as well. So I don't need to spend time extra like researching about it.
Awesome. Glad to hear it. Well, please keep in touch as you move forward. I'm happy to help as you move through the course and as you continue with your studying.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.